So good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am your virtual adventure guide here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces in the crowd today, but if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through like a gazillion live free interactive broadcasts. I think we're on number 90 this year already, which is insane. Joe and I just don't sleep at all, but it's so fun getting to showcase the world's coolest people and places with you every single day. So thank you all so much for joining us. Now, before I dive in with our speaker, because I've been really bad about this at the beginning lately, we do have a Kahoot today. So if you want to pull up kahoot.it, type in that game pin. I'll make sure you all have that to join us for a little quiz between the talk and Q&A portion today, and we're excited to have you. And today, you guys get to join in that quiz, in the Q&A, with one of my very favorite speakers we bring on the broadcast. So there are very few people that are as enthusiastic about their jobs as I am, but Nick Underwood joining us today is one of them. He is also the most proud West Virginian you are ever going to meet. All people in West Virginia are very proud of being from West Virginia. It seems like a great state to visit. I've got to go someday. Now, he has the most metal job in the history of government in the history of the world, and he gets to be part of the Hurricane Hunter team at NOAA. So he flies planes into hurricanes to gather crucial data about their trajectory, their strength, to help people make informed decisions and save lives all around the United States and beyond. So without further ado, we are going to be joined live by Nick, and I'm so excited for you guys to all meet him, as we've got a lot of people who've never had the chance to hear him speak before. So, Nick, welcome to the broadcast, man. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Happy to be here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure every time. Once a year, I get the chance to hang out with you. I smile for days in advance. It's very exciting. It's always a good program. You have some of the most popular programs in our history for like a non-live animal. Like if you don't have a pet, like a lizard or a cool furry thing, you're up there. So we're going to find out why, and you can dive in with your presentation anytime you want, man. Let's do this.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that intro, Jesse. So as he said, my name is Nick Underwood. My current title is I'm the Programs and Integration Engineer for the NOAA Hurricane Hunters. And so my job is talking with scientists and figuring out how to get their fancy instrumentation onto NOAA's fleet of aircraft. And today we're going to talk about hurricane hunting, which is a big part of what our office does, in addition to things like marine mammal surveys and coastal mapping studies and climate change studies and all of that kind of fun stuff too. So as Jesse said, I was born and raised in West Virginia. I attended West Virginia Public School. I studied aerospace engineering at West Virginia University. I graduated in 2014. And my first job out of college was working for the Navy. And so I worked for Naval Air Systems Command as a flight test engineer. For a little over a year, I worked with fighter jets primarily, so F-18s and F-35s. And after a year, I decided I wanted to do something a little more science-focused with my degree, and so I shifted over to NOAA. And so today, as I said, we're really going to talk a lot about hurricanes. And so this is a satellite image of Hurricane Florence in 2018, when it was a large Category 4 hurricane working its way across the Atlantic Ocean. Ultimately, this storm would make landfall in North Carolina as a Category 1 hurricane and kill about 50 people and cause about $24 billion in damage. Another major hurricane over the last few years was Hurricane Dorian. This is a satellite image of it when it was sitting as a Category 5 storm over the Bahamas. And ultimately, this would swing up into South Carolina and kill about 80 people and cause over $5 billion in damage. And so our team at the NOAA Hurricane Hunters, we fly aircraft into, around, and in front of hurricanes to gather important atmospheric and oceanographic data on them. And so on the left, those are all the flight tracks that our P-3 aircraft that we're going to talk about in a minute flew into Hurricane Dorian all the time from when it was a tropical storm near the Antilles until it made landfall up in South Carolina. And as we're flying these missions, we're collecting all of this data and we're sending that to the good folks at the National Hurricane Center. And so if you live near the coast or you've followed hurricanes before, you've probably seen an image like the one on the right. This is the cone of uncertainty. And so this is the National Hurricane Center's best guess about where a storm is going to be at a certain time and how strong it's going to be when it gets there. And so all of the data that we're collecting on the aircraft that we're going to talk about feeds into these forecast models. And so the better job that we can do in the air collecting this data, the better those forecasts are going to be, and the earlier we can warn people to get out of the way, to keep themselves safe, to prepare their homes, to keep their friends and neighbors safe. So that's why we do all of this. And so we've got 3 aircraft that we use to hunt hurricanes. They're all named after Muppets. So we've got Kermit, Miss Piggy, and Gonzo. And we're going to talk about Gonzo first. So this is our high altitude hurricane surveillance jet. And so rather than flying directly into the storm, Gonzo flies up above, around, and in front of the storm, up at 45,000 feet, so really high up. And it is collecting all of the data on the environment that the storm is in, everything that's feeding into it, everything that's going to push it around. And there's 2 prime instruments that we use to collect that data with Gonzo. The first one is what we call the tail Doppler radar. So if you see this big bulb sitting off the back of the aircraft, inside there are 2 radar dishes. And as we are flying around the storm, they're spinning around and taking little snapshots of the storm from the sea surface all the way up to the tops of the clouds. And forecasters and scientists can use this data to really understand the structure of the storm and how it is developing. And so this is a radar image from the tail Doppler radar around Hurricane Eta in 2020. And so you can see on the right side, this big mass of yellow and orange, that was Hurricane Eta as we were flying around it and collecting all of this radar data that the forecasters were then able to use. The other primary instrument we use are dropsondes. I got one with me here. So these are effectively weather balloons in reverse. And so instead of floating up through the atmosphere and collecting a bunch of data for us, these have a parachute. We drop them from the bottom of the aircraft. And as they fall down, they're collecting temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, and wind direction data. There's a radio transmitter inside that sends all of that back to our airplane in real time. And once that sonde splashes into the ocean, we send all of that data off to the National Hurricane Center, and it really helps to inform their forecasts about where those storms are going to go. And so a great example is, this is all the way back in 2005, so a long time ago. This is a map of the forecast tracks of Hurricane Katrina as it was working towards Louisiana. And so the red line is the best forecast of that storm without using the data from all of the dropsondes that NOAA's aircraft were dropping. You compare that to the green line, which is the forecast when the dropsonde data gets put into those forecast models, and you compare that to the black line, which is the best track, so where the storm actually ended up going. And you can see just how much of a difference including the data from those dropsondes makes on that forecast. You're talking about several hundred miles here of where a storm is going to go compared to where it actually went. We don't typically fly directly over hurricanes with Gonzo, but in 2019, this was the eye of Hurricane Jerry, as it was a Category 2 hurricane. And so we actually did, Jerry was a small enough storm that we were able to fly directly over, launch dropsondes all across it. And so this is looking down into the eye of a storm. And we're going to see a lot of eyes of hurricanes here in a minute when we talk about these aircraft. And so this is Miss Piggy. It has a twin aircraft, Kermit. These are our WP-3D Orions. These are pretty much flying research laboratories. These have a ton of scientific equipment on them. They have 3 radars on board. There's one in the nose. There's one in this M&M looking thing on the bottom of the aircraft. And there's one in the tail Doppler radar, just like Gonzo has. There's a pod on the wing that can measure rain droplets, size and speed. There are holes all along the bottom of the aircraft where we can launch dropsondes and other data gathering instruments. And this is a pretty big airplane. When we fly these through hurricanes, we typically have about 12 to 15 people on board. And that includes pilots and navigators and flight directors who are onboard meteorologists, electronics technicians, engineers like myself, scientists from the National Hurricane Center, and even journalists from news organizations so that they can help cover the storm and cover the good work that we're doing. And so rather than flying rather than flying over and around the storm, these aircraft fly directly into the hurricane, usually between 8 to 10,000 feet above the ocean surface. And so if you think about Gonzo flying around collecting data on where the storm is going to go and the environment that it is in, the P3s focus on how that storm is developing and how intense it's getting and how the structure of that storm is changing as it matures and grows. And so these aircraft really do fly into the middle of hurricanes. This was a radar image from Hurricane Florence in 2018. And so you can see our little aircraft marker in the center. And then all of these this is the eye wall of Hurricane Florence. So these are very violent storm clouds surrounding us. And these are pretty old aircraft. Kermit and Miss Piggy were made in the mid 1970s. And so they've been flying storms for over 40 years. And this photo is a few years old at this point, but every red hurricane symbol here is a hurricane that Kermit had flown through. I took this image 3 years ago. And so there's even more storms on the side of Kermit now. And then all of these flags up top are different states and countries that this aircraft has been to support atmospheric science missions, whether that's hurricanes or atmospheric rivers or any other type of research that scientists want to perform aboard these aircraft. And typically this is where I sit aboard this aircraft. With my new job, I don't fly as much as I used to. I do more program management type stuff now, but this is the station that we launch dropsondes from. And so you can see I've got a big computer rack in front of me with a bunch of data screens. There's dropsondes, all the instruments we need to actually collect the data from those dropsondes, and there's a window. And so you really do get to look outside and see what it's like to fly through a hurricane. And so we get asked all the time, what does it feel like? How does it go? And I always describe it as sort of being on a wooden roller coaster that's also in an automatic car wash. And so there's a lot of gray and wind and rain, especially when you're flying through the eye wall of the storm, which is the worst part. But eventually you start to break into the eye. And especially with larger hurricanes, category 3 and above, you get what's called the stadium effect. And so our aircraft is flying through the storm at 8 to 10,000 feet. And these cloud tops are reaching up to 30, 40, 50,000 feet. And so from our perspective, it looks like we're standing on the field of a football stadium with all of the stands up around you. And so this is flying into Hurricane Florence. You can see we've just left those nasty gray clouds of the eye wall behind, and we're really getting into the eye now. And this is when Florence was a big category 4 storm. If I cut ahead here a little bit, you can see there's actually blue sky above us. And so when these storms get more powerful, the eye really clears out. You get blue sky above. There's really only these lower level clouds that you see that are left. And what we're doing in the eye of the storm is really where we do the hunting. And so what we're trying to do is find what we call the center of pressure. And that is where the winds in the storm pretty much drop to 0. And it's at that point that all of that energy that's swirling around in that hurricane is trying to flow to. And so we will find that point, mark it, and then the folks at the National Hurricane Center will use that data and use that geographic point to start those computer models that are going to predict where these storms are going to go. And so you may have seen this video recently. This was flying into Hurricane Ian just a few weeks ago. And so Ian was definitely the roughest hurricane flight that I've been on. And the video looks a little choppy. It wasn't as choppy as that, but we definitely were getting bounced around. We were in the eye wall in Hurricane Ian for about 10 minutes. It was a very wide eye wall. There was tons of lightning outside, and we really got bounced around. One of the most impressive bits in this is that we have beds in the back of our aircraft, so our pilots and flight engineers can take a nap when they're not up front really holding on to the aircraft. And we took so much turbulence and such big hits that the beds actually came out from where they were. Things that were stowed in the aircraft were getting unstowed and coming loose. Coffee was splashing in the back of the aircraft. It was really rough ride, definitely the roughest that I've been on in my 6 years of doing this. And so this was the eye of Hurricane Ian, and we saw the eye of Hurricane Florence a minute ago. And you can see up top, there is that curvature. Ian was a category 4 storm at the time. What's impressive about this photo, though, is that this mission into Hurricane Ian, we took off at 2 a.m. And so we were flying at night, and this image was taken at night, but there was just so much lightning in the eye wall of the storm that it was almost like it was broad daylight outside. And there you can see actually one of those lightning bolts. I was able to catch it on a video and take this still image, but we're in the eye of the storm here, and you can see just how bright it was, even though the sun hadn't come up yet. And I've seen a lot of hurricane eyes over the last few years of being in this job. This was Hurricane Irma in 2017, when it was a large Category 5 hurricane working across the Atlantic. This was Hurricane Dorian in 2019. This was after it was a Category 5 storm. This is when it had weakened a little bit into a Category 3 storm. This was Hurricane Florence in 2018. And these missions that we fly are decently long. Typically, we're in the air for about 8 hours. This is a time-lapse video, so really sped up, of just one of our passes into Hurricane Florence. And so you can see we fly through these outer rain bands, we fly into the eye wall of the storm, we break into that eye, mark that center, collect that data, and then we have to work our way back out again. On that particular flight into Florence, we flew into the storm 9 times, just because we had the fuel for it, and we were getting tons of good data for the National Hurricane Center, as well as the researchers that were flying with us. And when I talk about the eye wall of a hurricane, it really is like a wall. And so this is Florence again, and you can see that we're still in the eye, there's blue sky above, but we're approaching this wall of clouds. And this is the eye wall of the storm. And so we go from a nice day outside to really the worst weather that you can find yourself flying through. The pilots and the flight engineer up front work really hard to keep the aircraft on our target airspeed. They work really hard to keep the aircraft straight and level, to keep us all safe in the back so that we can collect that data and get home safely. And I just want to emphasize how different the flight tracks are for Gonzo and then Kermit and Miss Piggy. And so on the left, this is a flight track from Gonzo flying around Hurricane Matthew in 2016. So you can see they took off from Tampa, flew up into the Atlantic Ocean, did a little circumnavigation of the storm, flew out into the Gulf of Mexico. As I said, they're flying around really gathering data on the environment around the storm and how that's going to push it around. And you compare that to a P3 flight track from the same day. They took off from Tampa, and rather than flying around the storm, they just zigzagged and crisscrossed and made their way all through the storm. And so the National Hurricane Center is really good at predicting the track of where storms are going to go. And that is an advancement that they've made a lot of progress with over the last 2 decades. Something that scientists still struggle with is getting the intensity forecast correct. So how strong that storm is actually going to be when it makes landfall somewhere. And a common process that makes that difficult is what we call rapid intensification. And so that is when a storm gains a lot of wind speed, gains a lot of power in a very short amount of time. And Hurricane Florence was a great example of this. And so I took this photo on September 8th, 2018. This is Tropical Storm Florence. And so you can see there's low level circulation. In the upper left, you can see there's still light on the horizon. And so the storm is still really getting its act together. 24 hours later, this was Category 2 Hurricane Florence. And so you can see the picture has changed drastically. You still low level circulation over here. You can see that the wind speed is really picked up. You can see those waves on the surface. Those are pretty significant waves. And you can see the eye wall around the storm is really starting to come together. And this is a change in just 24 hours. 24 hours after this photo, we had this, which was Category 4 huge Hurricane Florence. And so going from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in 48 hours is a big change. And it's really dangerous if a storm does that close to land, because people who maybe thought that a storm wasn't going to be as powerful suddenly don't have as much time to evacuate, to prepare their homes, to get out of harm's way. And so when storms do this close to land, and examples over recent years have been Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Ian, it makes for a dangerous situation, because our whole goal and the National Hurricane Center's whole goal is to provide enough warning for people that a storm, especially a very powerful storm, is headed their way and the kinds of impacts that the area they live in is going to experience. And so we are getting better at this. It's still a challenge. There's just so many dynamic things that go into how a hurricane develops. Wind shear, how warm the ocean temperatures are, all of these things factor into how strong and how big a storm can grow. And I kind of want to stop here because I've ran for about 20 minutes and I want to be sure to leave enough time for questions. But this is sort of a crash course in hurricane hunting and all the good kind of work that NOAA does to keep people safe on the ground and protect life and property.
Spectacular, Nick. As always, a really, really fun presentation. Just astonishing visuals, and I'm so glad you shared the Ian video too. I don't know how many of our students might have seen Nick, but he was briefly very popular on every news network with that footage, and people as alarmed as I was at the prospect of, I'm on a plane and there's like a little light turbulence, and I'm like gripping my wife's hand, and there's Nick with mattresses flying off and coffee everywhere. I'd like to know how you store your coffee in the back of the plane, but we'll get to that question in a bit. For now, we're going to dive in with our Kahoot, folks. So if you guys haven't got the game pin up yet, please feel free to do that now. For those who are new to Kahoot, the faster you answer, the more points you get. Now, you don't win anything, but you do win Nick and I's everlasting respect. So that is worth something. Already 52 of you in, which is great. We're going to dive in. There's about 20 seconds per question. And Nick, when there's like 5 seconds in each left, if you want to give us a hand and help us out with some hints, we'll appreciate that too, I'm sure. But let's get started, folks, and dive in, and then put your thinking caps on for some great questions for Nick as well. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. This is always my favorite part. I enjoy this very much. What agency is Nick and his team a part of? Now, he did say this 47 times throughout the broadcast, so I'm really hoping you guys got this down. Is it NASA, U.S. National Parks, NOAA, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife? I mean, if it was raining cats and dogs, it might be a fish and wildlife thing, but I don't know if that's our 60 answers.
So it's on my shirt. Oh.
Yeah, look, squint in the corner. Okay, almost everyone got this right. Very good. I like it. Way to go, guys. And we'll see where our leaderboard lies after this. Green Frog has our lead right now. Okay, good job. Let's dive in with question 2. All right, another quiz. They're all quizzes today. What is the highest category for a hurricane? So we mentioned some numbers throughout the broadcast. Is it 1? Like, is 1 the highest? 5, 10, or 50? Category 50. I hate when those come by. That's
Keep in mind, I talked a lot about Hurricane Florence, which was really big and really powerful. That was category 4.
Correct. It should be a hint. 87 of you. Wow, we're out almost at 100 participants. This is great. So yes, 5, 78 of you got that right. Way to go, guys. So 5 is 5 like the most is there it's based on wind speed, is it not, Nick?
It's based on wind speed, and 5 is the highest. There are other scales that focus more on like lowest central pressure in the storm, but wind speeds are really what people pay attention to.
Okay, green. Wow, our leaderboard stayed remarkably the same. That almost never happens. Going into question 3. So the Hurricane Hunter planes are named after characters from what show? Okay, this is one of my favorite parts of the broadcast. I enjoy this every time that Nick talks about this. Is it Power Rangers, Muppets, Batman, or Squid Game? I don't even know the characters in Squid Game because I haven't seen it yet. So at some point, I don't think any of our kids have. Hopefully, I don't know.
I think our aircraft are a little bit older than Squid Game.
Yeah, 112 of you now. Holy! All right. Gone. Almost everyone got this right. Way to go. We had some people who wanted it to be Squid Game, I think, but no. Alas, Muppets are our answer. Captain Lion. Oh, a 2-point lead. It's like neck and neck. Our final question, and then we're going to you guys for Q&A. Miss Thrasher's class first. The data the Hurricane Hunters collect gives us how long a forecast in advance. Is it 1 day? Do you have 24 hours to prepare? 3, 5, or 10? I don't think you explicitly said this in this one, but...
Well, so I think technically there's 2 right answers here. So
yeah, well, that's going to hurt our kids' chances. We're the fewest, one of the fewest possible. So 5. Yeah. So 3 is your other answer. That's more correct, you'd say.
So yeah. So the forecast that the National Hurricane Center puts out, it is at its biggest a 5-day forecast. Yes. But the 3-day forecast is the one that is very, very accurate.
Super accurate. Okay. I'm going to take your past program where you talked about 5 as my impetus for this. And our kids can do it under protest if they'd like. But Golden Bee comes out with a sneak victory over our frog and lion friends. But way to go, guys. And let us know who you are in the chat if you are any of those folks. But we're going to dive in with Miss Thrasher's class. They are joining us today in Birmingham, Alabama. If you guys want to take us away with a question, you are good to go. Hey, guys. Hi.
All right, Matthew, you can ask.
How bumpy is it in the plane?
Maren.
How bumpy is it in the plane? It depends on the storm, because every storm is different, and you can get bumped around just as much in a tropical storm as you can a Category 5 hurricane. And so Ian was the bumpiest flight that I've been on, not just because it was very bumpy, but it was bumpy for a really long time. So 10 minutes goes by pretty quick, but when you're getting bounced around in an aircraft, it feels like an eternity.
Yeah, I imagine so. Great question, buddy. Miss Gertzen's class, Peter, Kansas, come on in and take us away. Hey, guys.
Hi, my name is Avea, and my question is, have you ever been injured at work?
Have I ever been injured at work? No, I haven't, thankfully. So our aircraft and our operations team, the main thing that we focus on is safety. And so even though we're flying into hurricanes, which has a pretty good amount of risk with it, we do it as safely as possible. We have a great maintenance team that takes care of our aircraft before they even go take off. All of our pilots are highly trained. Everyone on board the aircraft knows what to do in an emergency situation. And so even though it looks and sounds pretty dangerous, we do it as safely as possible.
Great question, guys. All right, Miss Manners class joining us down the road from me here in Newfoundland. If you guys have a question, come on in. Hey.
Do you go in the hurricane every time there's a hurricane?
Do we go in? Yes. So especially the two things that we'll fly into hurricanes for. One is if it's threatening land, which means it's threatening people on the ground. And the other thing is for research. So even if the storm is going to stay out over the ocean and not bother anybody, we'll still fly into that because it has research value. And so hurricane season, June 1st through November 30th, we are on standby to go fly any and every storm that pops up for those reasons.
That is good to know. There's no hurricanes where just like, it's so big, we're like, we're going to sit this one out and just see how it goes. No, that's not an option when you're in the Hurricane Hunters. Great question, guys. Miss Wafer's class, Laurel Springs School, if you want to share a question on behalf of one of your many students around the globe, come on in.
Absolutely. We're a virtual school. We have students all over the world. I have students in a virtual room from Portugal, Virginia, New York City. I'm outside of Nashville, Tennessee. It's pretty cool. So Charlotte is wondering, she's thinking about going into a career in aerospace engineering. She wants to go into the Navy, and specifically she's thinking about hurricane hunting. She's in 10th grade, and she's wondering, what would you recommend at this particular juncture of her career?
Yeah, so hurricane hunting, there's a lot of different paths you can take to get into it. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade, but we've also got electrical engineers, we have meteorologists, we have aircraft mechanics, we have pilots and navigators. If you want to be a pilot and actually fly the airplane, you'll need to commission as an officer in the NOAA Corps. So those are our officers. They're the ones who fly the aircraft, and not just the hurricane hunting aircraft. They'll also fly our smaller aircraft that do marine mammal surveys and coastal mapping missions and all of that kind of fun stuff too. So it's great that you're interested in it. Engineering is a great track. I've loved my career so far, but there's a ton of different ways you can get into this. And so really just pursue whatever you think is going to be the most fun and exciting for you.
Great question. I don't think we've had that one for you before, which is really unexpected, but that's a great career, guys. Along the same lines, before I go back to our live classes, Ellie in Miss Sealar's class in Janesville, Wisconsin wants to know, how many years of education and training are required to do this job?
How many years of education and training? So education-wise, I have a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. Our flight directors, our meteorologists, they also have meteorology degrees. All of our pilots and navigators have college degrees, whether it's in environmental science or engineering or physics or something like that. And then training to actually do this job, all of it is really on-the-job training. And so every year we have aircrew training for the different aircraft to learn the different safety procedures, to talk about tropical meteorology and sort of understand the finer points of how we're going to go fly into a hurricane. So there's lots of training. It's year round. It's and to get trained up to like operate data systems and launch drop-ons like I did, it took a few flights to learn the systems, and then they kind of cut me loose and set me on my own. And it's always just, you're always learning on this job. So
I love when we get this question, and I want to know, we've got a lot of grade 5s today, and the idea of like an additional 10, 12 years of school sounds pretty daunting, but you do that and you end up really young and in a job where you're grinning ear to ear for an entire broadcast talking about what you get to do, and you get to work with people all over the world doing things that you absolutely love. And so this is something that sort of underscores a lot of the people we bring on these broadcasts, but particularly Nick. And so if you're keen on these things in Miss Wafer's class and any of our classes, again, put in that work early and you get to, not work a day in your life and have a fantastic career. So great query, guys. Miss Cottrell's class, Baldwinsville, New York, and then we're going to head to our Linwood and Isabel Selden School folks before we dive in with some YouTube questions. But New Yorkers, come on in. Hey, guys.
Hi there. My name is CJ. By the way, this isn't actually my question. Somebody else came up with it, but they already went, so I'm doing it this time. So the question was, has anything happened to any of your aircraft when you've been on those flights?
Yeah.
has anything happened to them? I was on a Gonzo flight where we got struck by lightning and had some electronics on board start to malfunction and smoke. And so that was sort of an emergency situation. We turned around from our mission, we went back and landed, and everyone was safe. A long time ago, well before I started, in 1989, in Hurricane Hugo, one of our aircraft actually had an engine flame out, and they got really rocked in a Category 5 hurricane at a really low altitude. They were only flying through at about 1,500 feet. I think as far as things happening and things being extra dangerous, that was probably the closest we've come to losing an aircraft. But our policies and safety procedures have changed a lot over the last few decades. We don't fly any lower than 5,000 feet now, just to give us that extra buffer in case something does go wrong. And like I said, there's so much training, there's so much work that goes into making sure that we do this as safely as possible. So even though there is risk associated with it, we are being as safe as we can about it.
I'm really happy you mentioned the preparation and sort of those policies and procedures. This is something that we hear about from astronauts, we hear about with cave divers. There are a lot of professions where there's a risk associated with it. They're sort of more dangerous than most people would sort of naturally go into. But again, all those professions have checklists, they have plans, they have procedures in place to avoid exactly that, because no one wants to get hurt in their job, no one wants to get killed in their job, and it's really important that you have those in place. So great question, guys. Miss Blaney's class, grade 7s in Linwood. You guys have your mic on, so we should be able to hear you. Hi.
Hi. We actually had a couple of questions. I had one student who wanted to know what the Coriolis effect was, and then I had another student who was very intently watching your video footage. So, no, do you want to ask your question? Okay.
What did it look like the propellers of the plane were hardly spinning?
Yes.
Okay. Good questions. So the Coriolis effect has to do with the rotation of the Earth and how things move across the Earth and deal with that rotation. I won't get too much into the Coriolis effect because it's a little tough to describe. But in that video I showed of the propellers not necessarily spinning, that was a time-lapse video. And so the camera was only taking images every couple of seconds. And so the way it just kind of lines up with the speed that the propellers are rotating, it looks like they're not actually moving, but they are spinning at a very fast rate. They're spinning at about 1,300 times a second. So
I guess the closest analogy for some of our students, if you've seen anyone with rims on their wheels that are slightly different, or they spin at quite a different rate. Like it looks sometimes like they're barely moving at all, but they are going just as fast as the car. So great query, guys. Let's head to Isabel Selden School, Coleman, Alberta. Welcome in Ms. McKee's class. And unmute your mic. Come chat with us. There you go. Hi.
Hi, my name is Pearson, and my question is, what was the first aircraft carrier you've been on?
Ooh.
What was the first aircraft
Yeah.
I was on? Okay. For my job, the first aircraft I was on was actually Miss Piggy. And I went on what we call an invest mission. So a storm hadn't really formed yet, but there was an open wave of low pressure system that might develop into something. And so I was 3 days into my job, and they threw me on one of these flights and said, hey, go check it out, see what the process is like and everything. And then 2 months after that, I would fly into my first hurricane, which was Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And that was also aboard Miss Piggy. And so I've got a good relationship with Miss Piggy. I think I've ended up flying more hours on Kermit, but I love all of these aircraft.
So I like the thought of you going through all these degrees and you're very serious and you've got the engineering thing going on and you phone home and they're like, oh, your first flight, what were you flying on? You're like, oh, Miss Piggy. And they just hang up the phone or they laugh or I don't know. Guys, we're going to take a few YouTube questions and then we'll head back to our live groups. A quick note for everyone too. Nick has kindly agreed to do a Padlet with us today. So if you have additional questions that you don't get answered during the broadcast, you can check out the link below. I'll make sure all our registered classes have that. You can send some and we'll check them for the next couple days, okay? But let's head to YouTube for a quick minute. Miss Hood's class, Bevel wants to know, how many flights have you been on?
How many flights have I been on? A lot over the last 6 years. I don't actually have a solid number on that, but we have 9 different aircraft in our office, and we support a lot more than just hurricanes. So I've been on a bunch of hurricane flights. I think I've flown into 23 different hurricanes over the last 6 years, but I've also spent time in the Arctic, flying around on one of our smaller aircraft called a Twin Otter. I've been out in Guam helping us measure gravity, which sounds fake, but it's real. We've spent time in Ireland. So we go to all these different places and fly all these different missions. And so I think hours-wise, I've spent over 3,000 hours flying aboard our aircraft. So.
Spectacular. What great places too. And gravity in Guam does sound fake, but I'll take your word for it. It's an honor. I'm so glad you mentioned this. So for our students, anytime people do cool field work anywhere in the world, there's like a Twin Otter involved. Like somehow they sneak their way into every country on the planet, which is it's a good plane.
It's a great aircraft.
I've never been in one, but you can. How many times have you been in a Twin Otter? Do you know?
I think I've probably got like 600 hours flying around in Twin Otters. So
commercial flights for the rest of our lives, kids. That's what Nick does just for a job every year. Mr. Miller wants to know, can you use drones to get better vet data? And then after this, we'll head back to our live classes.
Yeah, can you use drones? So the Ian flight, the video that got very popular of us getting bounced around, we actually launched a drone into the storm from our aircraft. And so we flew into the eye of Ian, we circled in the eye, launched a drone from our aircraft, and that drone then flew down to lower altitudes. It marked the center of the storm, it flew into the eye wall, and it flew around for about 2.5 hours. And so that's a new technology that we're still evaluating and still really getting into the usefulness of, but I think that's something we're going to do a lot more of in years to come.
Very, very cool. Great question, Aaron. All right, rapid fire round, folks. Time flies when you're having fun, so we are nearing the end of our broadcast, but I'm going to head back to Mr. Asher's class. We'll go one by one through all our groups. Come on in. Hey, guys.
Hi. Are we allowed to ask any more questions?
Hey, yeah, come on in.
Jackson, what was yours?
Does anyone ever get injured or hurt?
I think you already answered like that one. Because he said he had knocked him.
What are y'all's emergency procedures if something loses fuel?
Yeah. What are emergency procedures? So we've got a bunch of them. The main thing that we train and practice for actually is what we call a fire of unknown origin. So that's when something on board the aircraft, whether in a cabinet or in a rack somewhere, is overheated and has started to smoke and is potentially catching on fire. And so anytime someone smells something or sees something, we'll activate our emergency procedures. We'll get fire extinguishers. We'll walk around. We'll find where that's coming from, cut power to it if it's an electronic piece of electronics equipment. We also have emergency procedures for ditching. So in the event that we had something go so wrong with the aircraft that we had to land in the ocean, we have procedures for how we would do that and how we would secure ourselves and everything else in the aircraft, safely land on the water, launch life rafts, get everyone out of the aircraft, and then wait for someone to come pick us up. So there's a lot of potential things that could go wrong, but we have thought about all of those and we train and prepare for all of those situations.
Fire of unknown origin is something that would be a risk in any profession, really. Like you never want that. Yeah, you always want to know where your origin fire came from. Kansas, Miss Gertzen's class, come on back in, guys, and we'll head to Miss Manners next. Hey.
My name's Mario.
What is the most interesting thing you've seen in a hurricane?
No pressure at all, Nick.
What's the most interesting thing I've seen in a hurricane? I think the second flight through Hurricane Ian, I saw more lightning than I've ever seen on an aircraft, on a hurricane flight, really just any in my entire life. That I've seen more. I saw more lightning on that flight out the window in the aircraft, just so many flashes of lightning, so many bolts. It was really impressive to see.
That was a great picture highlighting that this was dark, and it doesn't look like that at all. Like that
I
is
know.
wild, vaguely terrifying experience. Back to Newfoundland, Miss Banner's class. Come on in, guys.
Hi, how do you know when a hurricane's coming?
How do you know when a hurricane's coming? So thankfully these days we have a whole bunch of satellites up in space that are constantly looking at Earth, constantly looking at clouds that are out over the ocean, even where there's no people at. And so we can look at these, and we've also got sensors that can measure temperature and pressure and really give us an idea of how things are moving out over the ocean where people aren't are. And so using that, we can figure out where a storm is, and especially if the predictions are saying that it's going to start heading towards land or that it's going to grow into a large storm, we can then forward deploy our aircraft to islands like Barbados or Aruba or St. Croix, and we can start going out and flying those missions and then gathering all of that data.
It's quite amazing that whether it's biologists, physicists, engineers, like the answer is always we collect a lot of data. Like we're always looking, we're always trying to understand the world around us, and that leads to these, things where we can save lives and protect property and do all sorts of things in this specific job, but just generally across the science and exploration field. The more we understand, the better equipped we are to handle what may come. Miss Perry's class in Janesville as well wants to know where the airplanes are stationed and what state and how quickly can you get the crew ready if there's a storm?
Where are we stationed? So our office is in Lakeland, Florida, which is between Tampa and Orlando. And our aircraft, especially during hurricane season, we have a watch bill. So a crew that knows that if a storm pops up, that they're on the hook to go fly missions. And we'll forward deploy in as quickly as 24 hours. So 24 hours notice, we'll go out, start flying missions, especially if something is going to develop quickly and we need to start gathering that data as soon as possible.
All right, 5 more questions, folks. Ms. Wafer's class, come on in and take us away. Hey.
Thank you. Juliana is our student from Portugal. She's in 10th grade, and she's wondering about your inspiration for your career. And we had Jane Goodall as a guest a few years ago, and she said when she was 4 years old, she read a book on chimpanzees and she was hooked. So we're wondering, did something like that happen with you during your childhood, or was it later that you became inspired?
So for me, my childhood, I was in 8th grade and I saw a rocket launch out of Cape Canaveral, Florida. And that inspired me to go be an aerospace engineer. My long-term career goal is to be an astronaut at some point. If I don't end up doing that, hurricane hunting is still a really good and fun career. But what's fun is that I've been in this job for 6 years, and 7 years ago, I didn't know that it was a job. And so I think that kind of speaks to there's always something new and exciting that you may not know about yet, that when you find it, you fall in love with it, and you just really enjoy the work and how important it is and the people you get to work with. And so I've really lucked into this job, but I'm so happy to still be in it.
Fantastic. Your Twitter handle indicates your desire to be an astronaut in the not-too-distant future. And it's really, I hope we get the chance to have you on the broadcast from the International Space Station in the not-too-distant future. And for our students, it's like the most interesting time to ever be interested in space. We're going back to the moon. We just launched Artemis the other day, planning for Mars missions. Like, it's just spectacular. And you're pretty well equipped on the way to having all the skills you need to be an astronaut. So Miss Cottrell's class, I'm coming to you. I'll take 1 from YouTube, 2 more to wrap up. Come on in Baldwinsville. Hey, guys.
Hi, my name is Noah. Are your planes built to withstand Category 5, the power of it?
Yes.
How are planes built to stand Category 5 hurricanes? So airplanes all over the world are engineered to be pretty tough, and they fly through high winds all the time. So especially passenger jets, you'll hear stories about them setting records of like flying between cities as like faster than ever. And that's because they'll catch like the jet stream, which has winds that are really fast, hundreds of miles an hour. And that allows them to zoom along. And so our aircraft, our P3s, Gulfstream 4, they were built to be sturdy aircraft to carry people safely no matter the weather outside. The P3 specifically, the way it's really able to fly through a storm and not overstress in those high winds is the fact that it is a propeller plane. And so our flight engineer and our flight crew up front, as we're flying through the storm and there's updrafts and downdrafts and all these things that are putting stress on the aircraft, they can move the power levers and adjust how much lift and how much thrust that these engines are producing. And that lets them lower those stresses on the aircraft and makes the ride smoother for us as well.
I've been in a ship, a modern day ship, where instead of a big wheel, it's like a little knob that you turn. So it makes you very happy that it's full of power. That just makes it so much more enjoyable. It romanticizes it. Ms. Pierce's class wants to know, what kind of notes do you take or data do you collect during your flight? Are you writing stuff down? Are you on a computer? As
an AVAPS operator, so launching the dropsons on the aircraft, the things I'm really looking at are collecting the serial number, the pressure offset, and then like the time that we launched the dropsons. And the dropsons themselves are collecting all of the wind speed, the wind direction, temperature, humidity, pressure. They're collecting that on their own. I'm sort of helping to quality control that and making sure that nothing's gone wrong with the instrument, making sure that the measurements make sense. But aboard these aircraft, we've also got scientists who are collecting data on ocean sea surface heights and surface wind speeds and rain droplet size, speed and direction. So there's tons of data that we're collecting. And there's all these really smart scientists at the Hurricane Research Division, at the National Hurricane Center, at universities around the country that take in that data, look at it, analyze it after the fact to really improve our understanding of these storms.
Yeah, great question, Ms. Pierce. All right, Linwood, and then we'll wrap up with Isabel Selland in Alberta. Come on in.
Joseph. Hi, sorry. We have one more question about the dropsons, and our student is just gonna come on over, Joe. Yeah, Joe had a question for you about the dropsons. Right. Go ahead.
How do you get the dropsons back when you drop them?
Yeah. How do we get the dropsons back? So unfortunately, they're what we call expendables. And so after we launch them from the aircraft, we really don't have a way to go and get them, partly because we're flying through some pretty violent weather, and also because the dropsons are designed to sink. And so once they hit the ocean, they get inundated with water, they sink down and make little nice houses for fish on the ocean sea surface. So they're not floating around. The outside shell is made of cardboard, so that dissolves in the water. And then there's just the electronics board on the inside. So unfortunately, they're expendable. We're trying to work on ways to make them more environmentally friendly, but we're not there yet.
No, and I think it's worth noting, I mean, the cardboard thing is already a surprise, but it's worth gathering that data for the limited amount of waste that we're creating to get an understanding of this hurricane. We're going to save a lot of places, a lot of people's lives, and I think that is worth the minimal impact. So great question, guys. Isabel Selland School, if you guys want to come on in and wrap us up with one final question, you are good to go.
My question is, how strong was the biggest hurricane you've flown into?
Yeah.
How strong was the biggest hurricane I've flown into? So the scale only goes up to Category 5, and the only Category 5 storm I've been in was Hurricane Irma in 2017. And that was one of the very first hurricanes that I flew through. It was a huge storm as it worked its way across the Atlantic Ocean. We had deployed to Barbados to start flying it and tracked it all the way until it made landfall in Florida.
Guys, this has been so much fun. We went extra. We got more questions than we usually do in any broadcast, which is spectacular. If you want to learn more about Hurricane Hunters, you can check out the wildly unwieldy URL below, but I'll make sure all our classes have that. If you want to learn more about Nick and his amazing stuff that he's up to at the Astro Nick, he's on all social media platforms, one of the sort of leading lights of sharing these stories with the general public, and we got the chance to be a recipient of that today. And of course, if you have more questions, if you want to inundate Nick with questions all the live long day, Padlet, I'll make sure all our registered classes have that link. Thank you guys so much for your enthusiasm and engagement today. And Nick, as you know, to wrap up every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our teachers to say a big thank you and farewell. So Miss Thrasher, Miss Gertzen, Miss Manor, Miss Weaver by herself, Miss Cottrell, Miss Brady,